Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first informational live stream of the year. We want to thank, first of all, Frost Bank for sponsoring our 2024 informational live streams this year. So, many of you may not know, but this week is National News Literacy Week. So, our focus, of course, for this live stream today is news literacy. So, on that note, I am excited to welcome my very good friend and journalism teacher at Milano ISD, the famous or infamous
Yeah, really.
Jensen Porter. Welcome, Jensen.
It depends upon which student you ask, I think.
Well, we're happy to have you today during our informational news literacy live stream. So let's go ahead and get right into it.
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, tell our viewers about yourself and your career in journalism and broadcasting and what you're currently doing.
Right, and that was the bell, as actually I am in school, but
Saved by the bell, right?
You're officially starting out, the bells ring. Sure. Well, yeah, I grew up in Missouri and eastern New Mexico, and then went to college in Texas, and my bachelor's degree is in radio, television, and film from West Texas A&M University, which is up in the Amarillo Panhandle area, and I have a master's degree in communication, also from West Texas A&M. I was in radio and television for right at a decade, both in radio and in working at a TV news station, covering the news pretty much every day for a decade. And then went into teaching kind of by accident, but was able to, I now basically teach everything from journalism to audio video production to, you can see kind of a green screen behind me there. We have a TV studio at school, and we make a TV newscast and things like that. And the kids really love it, and it's really a good way for them to learn how to read and write and speak better, which is very much needed among young people. And so from there, I've been teaching now for 17 years, 15 in Amarillo, and now I'm in my second year at Milano. They get a little touchy. It's Milano, not Milano.
Oh, Milano.
No, I was like, Milano. Milano. Okay, I got it.
So, as a journalism teacher and your career in journalism, why do you feel that news and journalism still matter?
Well, it absolutely matters because people have to know what's going on, and frankly, people are busy. People have families, or people are working, or whatever it is. But you need to know what's going on, what's coming up, what's the big news that's going on. How does it affect me?
Be informed.
Yeah, being informed is critical. And all you have to do is look at history to understand that. And the news media plays a major role in that. And, the Soviet Union had their one newspaper was called Pravda, which in Russian is truth. And everyone in Russia knew it wasn't the truth, but they didn't care. They just wanted to they wanted to have a certain thing, a certain version spit out, and that's what they wanted. And the people were too ill-informed to really know a lot of difference. And so it's such an important role that media plays, helping keep an educated populace, for sure.
Yes. And so I know especially nowadays, there's so many misconceptions about journalists and news and broadcasting. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure. Yeah. I think the first misconception people need to remember is that a lot of journalists they're not into the whole, I'm on the left, I'm on the right, I care about this or that. Most of us don't really care. We have a job to do. We're just trying to report the facts or try to go collect news stories every day. And we don't really get into the politics, especially at the local news level. There's not a whole lot of that. You can make arguments for the national level. There is more of a what's called gatekeeping, and you're going to focus on these certain stories as an example. But yes, most journalists aren't evil people trying to trick people or deceive people. And most of us just want to happy to have a paycheck and stay in the business. So that's probably the first one. The second biggest one, and I can say this because I was in the business. A lot of us don't really know what we're doing. But we don't really know, especially when you're first in the business as a 24-year-old reporter. you're learning on the fly. And I remember vividly having to ask the people I was interviewing, well, is this a story or is this not a story? Because I didn't know what I was talking about. Now, most journalists are good writers and they can act or write like we know what we're talking about, but we are still learning on the fly. And so, that's a lot of reason why mistakes are made, or that's why a lot of people, well, I don't know if that's really accurate, but I mean, I was there. I did not know what I was doing, and I'm happy to admit I just had a kind of an overview of what was happening. And for example, you can go to like a city commission meeting and there's 10 things on the agenda. And if you don't know what's going on with the city, what's important, what's not, you find yourself asking people, well, what's the big deal here? You're trying to figure that out. And so people need to understand that journalists are not some sort of experts or geniuses or anything like that.
Yeah. You have to know a little bit about everything, right, that you're reporting on.
That's right. And we can't. I mean, we're even intelligent people. I don't know a whole lot about farming and city commission and police and technology. And, it's very hard to be an expert in any of those fields. That's a very good point, Ella.
And also, too, speaking of kind of misconception of journalists, is that especially at a local level, they're just trying to tell a story and report the news. And especially with local journalists, they live in the communities. They also live in the communities, so they want to report the news as accurately as they possibly can because they care about the community that they live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, most people at the local level don't really care about politics or what it upsets. There are some interesting examples of dealing with local pressures versus national pressures. But in fact, I can give you one if you want one, and it's a true story. I mean, we found out we did a story on how a car dealership in a smaller town 50 miles away from the city we were working in Amarillo at the time, a car dealership 50 miles away was selling the same car for like $4,000 less. I was a news photographer at the time. My reporter said, I think that's a story. Let's go do it. And I said, all right. So we jump in the car and we're driving and we get a call from the big boss man at the station. And he said, what are y'all doing? And I told him what we were doing. And he said, you're going to turn the car around and you're going to come back to the station. You're not going to do that story. You're not going to report anything about that story. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Well, come to find out, the car dealership was one of the biggest advertisers on the local station, and they were not going to have anything. So there are local pressures, local pitfalls that you can deal with. If you live in a small town, you don't want to upset the sheriff or the chief of police because they can cut you off from stories. It's kind of a delicate balance, but it is certainly a real issue.
But it's important that people know about these pressures that journalists and reporters have to deal with. It's
absolutely.
Why don't you just report the news,
That's
the news?
right.
It's like we're trying to, but there's other things that prevent us from doing that sometimes.
Well, and I admire people who will. Sometimes you'll put your job on the line. And those are people with integrity. And usually sometimes getting fired in a journalism job can sometimes actually lead to a better journalism job or a better job just because people see that you stood for the truth, which is what journalism is all about. Please just put the truth out there and let people decide for themselves.
Yes. So that leads us into the next question. So how do journalists and journalism work, and how do they make decisions, and why they make mistakes sometimes? And I think you already touched on that a little bit.
Sure, to a certain extent. Normally what happens is there's a morning meeting. It's certainly in the radio and television business. It's very different now. And I know we'll talk about some of the 21st century news gathering here in a minute. But, you have an assignments editor or a news director, and you come in and some days you're just actually looking for news. Is there anything? And then sometimes because usually you'll either get emails or press releases, or in the old days it was faxes with crime that happened overnight or crime that happened in the morning. And okay, team A, you're going out to cover this. You're covering the shooting. Team B, you're going out to cover the city commission meeting. Team C, you're going to go out and do the story on the house fire. Things like that. Well, that that's pretty straightforward. And then some days you're really looking, especially at the local level, you're looking for some news. I had to literally every night before I left the station when I was on radio, I had to call city police, dispatch, the county sheriff, the Texas DPS, every news, or excuse me, every police organization in the area to go, hey, is there something going on?
Mm-hmm.
That answers the back part of the question, I think, is why do people make mistakes? Well, you have to, I can't drive 45 miles to go get all the information on this shooting or this incident, this grass fire. I have to go off of what the person over the phone, over the emails tell me.
Yeah.
If it's a big enough story, yeah, we send somebody out, but resources are limited. They were limited back in the 90s and 2000s, but they're definitely in the last, you see major changes in the last 10 years, especially. They can't cover it. So you have to go off of what people will tell you. If that person has an agenda, or if that person is just a dishonest person, you can deceive the news media. And
yes.
I mean, we could talk about dozens of examples of that. Again, I'm not trying to make this controversial. We can pick a topic, but everything from COVID to, George Floyd to Trayvon Martin to, the Israel-Palestinian conflict. You see these kind of half truths, and people don't understand why aren't we covering the whole truth? Well, they won't give it to us, or we won't go get it.
Yeah. And that also speaks to, journalists have to abide by standards, fairness, accuracy, transparency, etc. And so journalists can do that to the best of their ability. But like you said, if their source is, not a very good person and gives them misinformation, that's all they have to go by.
Well, yeah. Because I mean, if you're in Austin or you're in Midland, and there's a big story in Dallas, we can't go to Dallas to investigate it ourselves. We have to go off of what people. And again, in general, it doesn't work. People are honest because they know if you make up something, they can come back and get you. Certainly, in terms of your credibility, which is another great journalism term, is credibility and fairness. And fairness is key. I always teach both my students, and just from my experience, look, just put both sides in there.
Yeah.
I know you might not agree with this side, or you don't think that's right, or whatever you think, but you've got to put both sides in there and let the people decide for themselves.
Exactly.
The problem is that a lot of people will either take out parts, or it's called agenda setting. And I will. I had a nice PowerPoint for this, but we lost the internet. Let's go on the board so you folks out there who are watching can see. Agenda setting is a very, very important example. So you see there's the term, and you learn this in college, and the phrase is simply this: not how to think, but what to think about.
Right.
And that's very, very, very important for adults to understand, because if I decide, if this Facebook page decided to do a story every day on how bad Alba's cooking is, okay, that's all we talk about.
It's pretty bad.
Well, I don't know. No one knows. But if we do that every day, then people are going to start to believe it. And instead of, well, maybe we should look at the whole example of what Alba is, or the Permian
report
Basin.
on the whole of Alba, not just one.
Right. And see, and that's what you see here is you have a media, and you can pick whatever issue you want. Sorry, it's kind of crooked. You can pick whatever issue you want, and you can just fill in the blank right there. But the media has a powerful role in that they can shine a spotlight on just that part.
Yeah.
We're not going to focus on this, or we're just going to focus on just this. And that's where people get misled. And there's, again, I could literally give you tons of examples. COVID is one that comes to mind. When you look back, the fact that they would report deaths, but they wouldn't report what ages they were, what the situation was, and then years later you find out, look, the average COVID death was 78 years old.
Yeah. You have to report all the facts, not just certain facts.
Yeah. Look, if I'm in my 70s or 80s and I have lung or heart problems, I should certainly I should be quarantined. I should not be out in public. I know a lot of people who are that way, but if the average death age is 78, and America has a lot of older, overweight people with heart problems, that fits the facts more than the whole. It's the Black Plague, because when it first came out, people thought 1 out of 3 people were dying. I'm like, that is simply not that's not an accurate statement. But they were interested. I don't know if it was just scaring people or making people uncomfortable. Those are questions you'd have to ask the national media. But and it's about hyping and keeping people involved and engaged and stuff. Mm-hmm. But that was handled poorly at the national level for sure.
Yeah, and but as a media, as journalists, as reporters, you do have to report everything fairly, accurately, and be transparent and report everything as a whole. But also, as consumers, we have to be smart news consumers, right? So, and use critical thinking when you're reading, when you're intaking any kind of media, whether it be newspaper, TV, anything. So, can you talk about how, or give examples of how people can be smart news consumers?
That's a great question and a real challenge. So, like I said, people are busy, or they're working, or they don't really want to have to screen things. Unfortunately, today there has to be that. You have to kind of. I tell people that there's 2 things you should look for. Look for certain phrases that they use, and also look for opinions that are usually snuck in at the bottom of a news story. And they'll report the facts, and then at the bottom they said, what President Biden did was dumb, and blah 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 blah. Like, look, your opinion has no place in a news story. I don't want to hear your opinion. You're telling me the news. If you want to write an opinion article. And so you hear things like that, and when they start writing things like that, and that's a fairly new phenomenon. And that happened because I think this is also important, Alba, is that people need to recognize that when a lot of those old news reporters, people like my old bosses, your old bosses in the news business, when they retired, they were replaced by people who, they were not particularly, they were not as sound on, you don't put that on the air until we know it's confirmed. You don't put that on the air. You don't put an anonymous source until you can prove it's credible. You have to have those examples. And so people now are like, well, I don't know what to pick, or I don't know where to go with it.
Reporters nowadays are, they may be confused, or like, I thought this was news. I was reporting in the news. And it's like, no, that's not.
Yeah. And remember that the poor journalist might just be, look, I'm just following orders. I was told to go out and do a story on, and you can pick your topic or your example, but people are now very skeptical, and they kind of should be. Frankly, that there is a lot of belief of people, and this is for all you people watching out there. Most people want something that will either reinforce what they already believe, and they look for stuff like that.
Yeah.
If something rejects it, they just reject it. And that's a key point for people to recognize, is that if you're just getting reinforced over and over and over again, either you're the most truthful person and you have all the answers, or you're in the echo chamber and you're just listening to certain people. And again, that's a problem on the left, on the right, in the middle, whatever. So people have to be able to, as a wise man told me once, if you're gonna be able to make a point on on an issue, and you can pick your issue, you must be able to defend the other side, not just know the other side, but can you defend it? I thought that was terrific wisdom, because if you can defend the other side, even if you don't agree with it, you're pretty well versed on what the topic, or what the way that is. And most people just want to be either reinforced or reject. I think that's a great phrase, is reinforce and reject. For that.
Reinforce their beliefs.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Because for most adults, Alba, and you guys know this too, for most adults, the facts don't matter and the truth doesn't matter. What matters is what people believe.
Yeah.
Key point that people need to remember.
But, that's just what I'm saying. It's like, you can't put all the blame on media and broadcasting and journalists. It's that's like right. You have to be a smart news consumer as well, and not just seek out, news media that just,
I agree with that.
You believe in. Yes.
And
And
it's
there
true.
are still plenty credible news sources out there, despite what, I know media in general has gotten a huge bashing in the last few years, but there are plenty of credible news sources, specifically local broadcasting stations are very credible for the most part.
Sure, and most local, and again, most local media are just trying to find news to do their job. Um,
Yeah.
there is a big difference, I think, between that and the national. There are gatekeepers of the national media. We're just going to focus on this, whereas again, the local people, in general, you can certainly trust. If you don't believe it, just verify yourself. You can
Yeah.
find research to prove if the local person or the national person is knows what they're talking about.
Yes. And so let's talk a little bit about how do you feel the media and journalism is changing with the, social media and AI, which is, it's like AI, there's a lot of AI plagiarism. That's AI is not real writing, it's plagiarism and not real writing, but it's like I say, it's a tool like everything else.
Sure,
But
and yeah,
talk a
people need
little about
to.
how it's changing.
No, sure. Well, people need to understand AI is going to happen. Um,
Yes.
there's they can almost write like a journalist already, and
Hmm.
so that's going to make it even harder to kind of figure out because once someone just gets a chat bot or an AI thing, they can just spit out news by the dozens. Again,
Hmm.
if you repeat a lie often enough, people will generally tend to believe it. We've seen that from
Hmm.
tons of examples in history. But the biggest change is in the 21st century on that side of it is when a lot of these old guard news directors and news reporters retired, and
Hmm.
people came in and they had a different thought on what news. They believe sincerely that what, it's my job to report the news just like the previous people did, but I think it's important to tell the story this way.
Hmm.
That is not your place, but
Hmm.
that's how they believe, that's how they feel about it. And
Yeah.
so on social media, of course, nothing will get people fired up more than doing a truthful news story on someone. And if you do an article about Beyonce or Taylor Swift, and the trolls will come out and just in hordes, and you can be telling the complete truth. They're still going to come after you. And remember, as a journalist, put yourself in our shoes. Hey, do I want to read about a whole bunch of threats and calling me terrible names and driving by my house, or do I want to be blissfully ignorant and still try to do the truth so I can save my mental health?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
trick. And some people don't want to. They'd rather just kind of be a propaganda arm. You look at what's happening. The NFL is talking about buying a piece of ESPN. There will be no more hard journalism on football if the NFL owns part of ESPN.
Yeah.
That's just that simple.
The monopolizing of the media, unfortunately, is happening the media is not the only industry that's happening in, but
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, Disney owns ABC. ABC is not
hmm.
going to do anything that's going to criticize Disney. And if there's a real problem in Disney, we'll never hear about it.
Yeah. So lastly, Jensen, can you talk about, because you're a journalism teacher, you would think would be the perfect person to talk about this, recommendations for anyone that's still interested after hearing all this in entering into the journalism or the news media broadcasting field.
Sure.
And as a literacy organization, I always promote gotta have good writing skills
Oh, yeah.
first and foremost.
There's still a market. There's a lot of people now who are independent bloggers or reporters. They're kind of what you would call a journalist in some aspects.
Hmm.
Um, yes, as the local medias begin to, or excuse me, continue to shrink. And I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. We had a lady from the Washington Post came and talked at A&M down here last year, and she said it's getting a harder gig to get into because media is becoming concentrated in three cities: New York,
Hmm.
Washington D.C., and Los Angeles. But she talked about there's certainly still jobs available, and more importantly, if you can read and write well, there's job opportunities for you. It's a
Yes.
skill that's fading, and
Copywriting.
yeah, copywriting, yeah, PR writing, things like that. There are all kinds of demands, jobs in that field. Just putting together website content for businesses now is a huge
Hmm.
business. I have some
Yes.
former students who are into that, and they have a lot of work, and they have plenty of work to do to update content on websites and things like that. And that would be a kind of a form of journalism, I think, in some aspects, is to focus on that. The news side of it is still part of it's going to always be there, especially at the national level. The local levels, you're finding fewer and fewer. They're starting to kind of shrink staffs of newspapers. I'm sure in Midland, Odessa, to Nashville, to Amarillo, they've laid off most of their newspaper staff, and so that is kind of a problem. But again, going online now, you can kind of do your own thing and get viewers or get clicks or get followers. All that kind of stuff is the future for journalism, and it's certainly there for people who want to write well.
And I've seen a lot of I guess broadcast journalists transition into writing independent articles for magazines and things like that, investigative articles, which are still very important and
needed
and still big. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a demand and there's a need for honest people who will write the truth and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. So it's not obsolete. It's just changing, and there's still opportunities out there.
Correct. Oh yeah, correct. Yeah, I'm not trying to say you can't get into journalism. I think it's just it's changed a lot, and people have to be able to have the internet skills and the ability to attract followers, write content that people will click on. That's why headline writing is so key now, Alba. If you can click on a headline they used to call it, it's called clickbait, but if you write a good headline, and you start to get a following every week. So, I wonder what so-and-so, my favorite blogger, wrote about this, and they're going to be there.
In podcasts, podcasts are super popular, everybody. This is our version of a podcast. So, Jensen, anything else you would like to add that you would like people to know about journalism and news media and news literacy?
I would say it's important to, besides reading both, understanding both sides of an issue, there are good websites and good things out there that you can find, not just to reinforce your beliefs, but the people who are out there looking for truths. A gentleman like Dr. Thomas Sowell out at Stanford is a terrific example of that. I mean, he started on the left, he went to the right, now he's more libertarian, kind of in the middle on a lot of issues. But he writes things and he just says, I decided I'm just going to write the facts and put them where they are. Dr. Thomas Sowell, just type that in on YouTube. You can go down the rabbit hole pretty quick on his books and what he's written about. There are certainly solid people out there who are interested in truth and ethics. And if you follow those things, you can become a good writer too, just by reading and educating yourself, especially if you are younger, to go, look, I need to find the truth on this, not just what I believe.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Jensen. I think we're up at the top of the hour and the bell's about to ring, I think. So we're getting cut off by the bell here. But I want to thank you again, Jensen, for sharing and educating our viewers and followers and our students too. Our students watch these informational live streams. So we'd love to educate them on news literacy. So
appreciate you and Andrea doing all the work. And this is a great organization, and it's something that people need to remember, and certainly people need to support as you go forward. To help people become more literate will really help improve the country at a fundamental grassroots level, which is really needed. So great job, guys.
Well, thank you, Jensen, for saying that. And thank you again for joining us.
They didn't pay me to say that either, by the way, just so you all know.
I did not pay him, no. So for everybody else, make sure and tune in next month for our next literacy live stream, which will be focused on health literacy, which is another important topic. And look forward to seeing everyone next time. See everybody. Stay warm.